Jordan Poole embracing a new role. Herb Jones taking a leap offensively. We're breaking down what success looks like for the Pelicans' key role players. It's the Friday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans in NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Friday, and we're going to continue looking at what success means for certain players, certain people associated with the New Orleans Pelicans here. We covered most of the big names in yesterday's show, but let's switch gears to more of the role player type of guys. I want to look at Jordan Poole. I want to look at Herb Jones, as well as Dejounte Murray, Jose Alvarado, Saddiq Bey, Yves Missi, and Kevon Looney. We're going to cover it all in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. What is a successful season for those players? Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. I see y'all saying hi, just saying you're an everydayer, telling me you watch the shorts, all of that. I appreciate it all so much. And don't forget, you can also watch Locked On Pelicans on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network every single weekday at 10:30 a.m. Same place. I just completely blanked. Same place. It's a Friday, y'all. Same place you watch your Pelicans play. So let's get into this. Let's continue looking at, what a successful year is going to be for the more role-playing kind of guys here in New Orleans. So I want to start with Jordan Poole and Herb Jones, right? Two guys whose success, it might not be like the front page news for the New Orleans Pelicans. That's probably Zion, the rookies, Trey as well. But they could absolutely make or break the New Orleans Pelicans like regular season ceiling and what their seeding could be in the playoffs here. And I think Jordan Poole is arguably the most interesting. Poole is in a very different position now than he was with the Washington Wizards or even the Golden State Warriors. With the Wizards, he's just the number one guy. They were bad, right? Just go lead that team up and do your thing. With the Golden State Warriors, he had a variety of different roles, but often was kind of the go-to scorer with that bench unit. But success for Poole is going to be very different this season, in my opinion. Success is going to be adapting to a very different role, and that's going to be the third option. If you're leading a bench unit, you're kind of a number one guy, but here we have him penciled in as a starter, but he's going to kind of be behind Zion Williamson and likely Trey Murphy in the pecking order when it comes to that. So this isn't Washington anymore, and Poole was quietly very, very good the past 2 years, in my opinion. He's a better player, I think, at this point in time than CJ McCollum is. He shot better from three than CJ did last year. But this is going to take a little bit of a change in mindset. And the good news is he's a great locker room presence. By all accounts, everyone raves about him pretty much with everything. So him kind of adapting his mindset, shifting his mindset isn't something that I don't think that he can do. I think this is something he's very, very capable of doing it, right? By accepting a new role here in New Orleans, he also has an opportunity to kind of redefine who he is in the eyes of people around the league. He's often seen as empty calories, empty points, an inefficient chucker, a volume guy with low efficiency. And at times that's been true, at times it's not been true. But that's kind of how he's viewed a little bit here. We're doing the top 100 NBA players for Locked On, and I don't think he's going to be in the top 50, right? Because of all of that. But by embracing being a third option, his efficiency should skyrocket. The volume goes down. He's taking smarter shots, and that efficiency goes up. And this is an opportunity for Poole to kind of change how people view him. He, not as a star, but as a guy who's really going to help winning basketball. He should be able to space the floor as a spot up option. He should move well without the ball and then attack the basket in rhythm within this offense. This is someone, though, who last year averaged, where'd the numbers go, 20.5 points per game, 4.5 assists, and shot 38% from three on 9 attempts per game. I don't think he's going to have the same amount of 15.5 shot attempts per game on this roster, but those are very, very good numbers, right? And he can also play downhill, get to the line, which I think he's going to have plenty of options to do. I'm really excited to see him kind of as a third option and watch that efficiency grow even more so and become, kind of an elite guy in that sense. Success for him is also being that stabilizing force in the locker room. He's a great reputation with other players and is known as a great locker room guy. And the Pelicans need that leadership in New Orleans. Draymond Green even recently said that he thinks Poole can thrive in New Orleans and is going to be in store for a very good year. And I agree with that. I just think it's going to be a different role than the one in the past. He's not the number one option. He's maybe at times the number two option. He's not going to be the full-time point guard like he was more so in Washington either. It's going to take him kind of embracing that new role, but everything we've heard about him, he's going to be able to do that. I think he's in store for a very good year. I don't want to say big year because the numbers might dip from that 20.5 points per game, but I certainly think he's capable of somewhere between 16 to 19 points per game on really good efficiency, and I think that's going to be exactly what the Pelicans need to get back to winning ways, and I think Poole's really going to influence that. Let's go to Herb Jones because this one's a little bit simple, right? Look, a successful season for Herb Jones is him just being Herb Jones. Make another all-defensive team and be one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA. Boom, done. We're finished there, right? That would be a success. But if this team wants to win, they are going to need him to kind of take more of a step offensively than maybe he's had in the past. We've seen flashes of it, but he has not been that consistent guy, in my opinion, offensively. There's a season of basically 42% from three. That's all tremendous, but it's been streaky, right? He shot 42% 2 years ago, but last year was 30.6. The year before that, 33. The year before that, 33. Those aren't particularly great numbers. Who's the real Herb Jones? Last year was filled with injuries too, so we can kind of remove that one from it. But he's got to show that kind of growth from consistent three-point shooting, and he's got to do it on the volume too. I think him being at 3.6 three-pointers per game the past 2 years is good, but you'd like to see that get above 4. I think that's going to be something that would be really important for this team when it comes to it. So maintaining basically at least 38% from three is going to be massive, and make sure you're taking those. There's been times when he's been tentative to shoot from the corners, to shoot from three, and he passes up and turns down wide open looks. You don't want that. Unless he's going to then attack the basket, attack a closeout rather than just passing the ball. But he's got to lose some of that tentativeness, I think, when it comes to the three-point shooting. Herb doesn't need to create his own shot, right? He just needs to be a weapon that teams have to guard, in my opinion. And if he's doing that, he's going to really elevate the offense here, and the Pelicans are still kind of figuring out what their offensive identity is. Doesn't need to be flashy. Just be enough of a threat so that teams don't ignore you. If Herb Jones can kind of reach that level of offense, we know that the passing is there. We know that he's a very good cutter and works off ball, but it's going to become more of a threat, right? Just because you move doesn't make you a threat. He's got to find a way to make teams actively guard him rather than the Pelicans playing, 4-on-5 when it comes to offense. That's going to be a really important thing. So hopefully we can see that kind of growth from him. So coming up next, let's look at Dejounte Murray and his return from injury, along with Jose Alvarado and Saddiq Bey. What's a successful season for those guys? That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by OpenPhone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. So think about the last time you had an urgent need. I needed a mechanic about a month or so ago, and I called a couple places. It was a weekend. None answered, and one eventually did, and that's who got my business. It's as simple as that, right? If one person doesn't answer, you're not going to wait. You move on. That's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or computer. So OpenPhone is going to let you manage business calls and texts from a single app, and the shared inbox is a game-changing feature. Your team can jump into any conversation instantly without missing a beat, and their AI agent handles after-hours calls, answers common questions, and captures leads so you never miss a customer. And OpenPhone is offering listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's openphone.com/lockedonnba. And if you have an existing number with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone, what was the tag? There it is. No missed calls, no missed customers. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And for your second listen, it's Locked On NBA. I'm on there every Friday with John Krause of Locked On Celtics, breaking down the biggest stories in games from around the association. No offseason in the NBA. Make Locked On NBA your second listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's run through 3 more players and what success looks like for them here. And I want to start with Dejounte Murray because this is going to be a really interesting one. Coming back from injury, what is success going to look like for him? And I think that's going to be this is the one that I'm not entirely sure, and I'm curious what you think. So let me know in the comments down below. To me, success is kind of finding the right role post-injury and getting back to being the player that he was a couple of seasons ago. I don't think he's going to be starting when he comes back from injury. He's going to be on a minutes restriction, so it's just going to limit his impact. That type of injury that he had, the Achilles, is a year-long injury till you just feel 100% right. He'll be back before then, I think. I think we'll see him December, January, February, somewhere along those lines. But he won't be like the same player just then. It takes a little while. So if the goal is for him to just kind of find the right role to impact the team in a positive way, and the Pelicans conceivably, right, depending on what path they choose, but say he returns and they haven't chosen a path because it's before the trade deadline, it then becomes, okay, is this someone who is going to try and help them win, find the right role to help them win and make an impact because they're going to be trying to do that? It's going to need to be on the defensive side. He was not good defensively last year when he played, and it leads to this question. Has he dropped off as a player, or did it have to do with all of the off-court stuff that he was dealing with? He has spoken about that on the podcast that he was on, and then I've talked about it on the show. Joe Dumars has reached out to Dejounte Murray as well, so hopefully that stuff that he went through has been sorted. Hopefully, look, just for him as a person, I hope he's doing okay, right? Like, that sounds like a lot that he went through on top of the injury and on the change from Atlanta to New Orleans. Like, that's a lot, truthfully. That's going to impact your play on the court. He's a human, right? That's completely understandable. So I hope all that stuff gets resolved and he can just go back to being the best player that he can be. But I do think he'd be able to make an impact defensively. We look at this team and there are big worries about the defense. Now, I've done a show on how I think that's going to change. It really has to do with their offense too and making shots at the rim. Did a whole show on that. I'm probably going to hammer that point again because I do think that's a really important thing. And there's some kind of secret things with this team that can stabilize the defense, actually. But Murray was just not good. They need another guy at the point of attack to really kind of disrupt opponents' offenses, force steals, and not just rely on Herb Jones, who you'd rather guard like the opponent's best wing player, not their best backcourt player. Murray needs to be that backcourt guy. And I think even when he comes back from injury, maybe you don't have the athleticism to explode at the rim for dunks, or you don't feel comfortable and your shooting form's not there. But can he be a plus defender? And I think the answer to that can be yes. So I think a successful season for him is when he comes back from this injury. Are you an impactful defender? And if he's capable of doing that, to me, that's a successful season, along with just showing that he's healthy and that the offensive game will hopefully come from that. So let's go to another guard, Jose Alvarado. What is a successful season for him? For Jose, it's similar to Herb, right? Just be Jose. Be healthy and be Jose. Every team needs that kind of like chaos agent, in my opinion. They're also just kind of fun. And Jose Alvarado thrives in that role, particularly when it's kind of like controlled chaos, which is what he does, right? I would expect he and Jeremiah Fears are going to battle it out for the backup point guard spot going into next season. If it's Jose Alvarado's, totally fine, but make sure you're running the offense, being that kind of point guard that the second unit is going to need, and also kind of being a point guard when you're playing with the starters too. He's going to be forced into that role. And then of course just do the full court thing. You're seeing a lot more NBA teams pick up full court. We've seen Jose Alvarado do this, really frustrate Chris Paul in the playoffs as a rookie. They're going to need something like that. That's a really good way to kind of supercharge this defense in spurts, is to pick up full court, and Jose Alvarado can do that. I'd like to see more of that with him. We know about the GTA steals and all of those things, but having him be that kind of guy that can really disrupt an offense in close games, fourth quarter, even in spot minutes, is going to be massively important for the Pelicans, and Jose has proven that he can do it. He's got to kind of stay healthy. He's dealt with injuries the past couple of years. He should be going into this season fully healthy, fully rested. I'm excited to see that from him, because when he's on the floor, you feel it. He just changes the energy, the tempo, and really often outcomes. And you could just feel the difference when he's out there. And that might save the team in a win or a loss, or prevent a losing streak from happening. Something along those lines, right? Just Jose being Jose is going to go a really long way with this team. If you're looking for a little something more here, it would be improvement as a shooter. That's going to be important here. The team is light on shooting. There's not like court spacers outside of Trey really on this roster. Hopefully Jordan Poole as well. But you're going to need Jose Alvarado to make his threes and take them in decent volume as well. And he's proven he can do that at times, I think. This is someone who last year took 5.5 3-point attempts at 36%. It's not an elite number. It's a respectable number. The year before that, he was at 37%, almost 38%. That's a much better number. He finished 6th in Sixth Man of the Year voting. If he can get back to that kind of number, I think that's a really good thing. But he's also got to do it while being healthy. So final guy I want to look at in this segment is going to be Saddiq Bey, because I think Saddiq Bey is someone who can have a pretty good impact on this team if he figures a couple things out, right? He's coming off an injury where he missed all of last year. That's not an ideal situation for him to be in. So that's already a little bit, kind of working against him, I think here, that just not a lot of minutes when it comes to everything, right? He last played in the 2023-2024 season, with Atlanta. They played decently there. 14 points per game, 6.5 rebounds, right? He's an inconsistent shooter from three, but the year before that, in Atlanta, after he was traded, shot 40%. So he's proven he can kind of do it here. This is going to be figuring out like who he is. I've seen a lot of people be like, he's your Najee Marshall replacement. And like, in some degree, yeah, but also in some way, like not particularly when it comes to everything with that, right? Like, he's not the same kind of like chaos energy guy that Najee Marshall is. He's a little bit different. Success for Saddiq Bey would be fitting into a 3-and-D role in New Orleans. The problem is he's just not been that in his career. He needs to shoot 38%, 36 to 38% would be a success on decent volume. For his career, he's 35%, right? That's not a particularly encouraging sign. And he does it on volume, but if you're missing those threes, that's not great. You're not actually a threat. Teams aren't going to really pay attention to that, and you're not then considered a threat, similar to what we talked about with Herb Jones, right? And then staying solid on defense. He's not a good defender. He's not a good defender. I had high hopes for him coming in that he could be, but he's not proven that. He's been a liability. He needs to improve on that side of the ball. With him is he's not a creator. He doesn't get his own shot, create his own shot. He needs to hit open shots and defend his position. That's about it. But when you watch him in Detroit, he was often a black hole offensively. They would get him the ball and he would just kind of do whatever he wanted. Sometimes that's a little bit Najee Marshall-like, but those are the qualities of Najee Marshall that you're looking for there. This is about fitting into the team. And notice that is a theme with a lot of these players, is fitting into the team and the roles that the Pelicans need them to play. They're kind of gambling on some of these guys being able to do it or not. And while we're optimistic they can, sometimes that proves to be a little bit of a problem. And I think that's going to apply to Saddiq Bey as well. So coming up next, let's look at the big men. Yves Missi and Kevon Looney. Those are the guys that I really want to look at coming up next here in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Summer sports are in full swing, so whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, FanDuel is the best way to make every game more exciting. So you're already following the action. Why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. Right now, I was actually looking at the NBA futures, the odds for MVP, Rookie of the Year, Most Improved Player. Do the Pelicans have a chance of getting into any of those? I'm going to make the case probably on Monday's show for y'all. If you think Cooper Flag is a lock for Rookie of the Year, you can just go jump on that now. If you think someone like Ace Bailey, who's getting really good odds, can kind of steal that spot, there's a good chance. And I think you can make some money from it. So if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to join. New customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Again, that is $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins over at FanDuel. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And for your second listen, it's Locked On Saints. It's almost game day here for the black and gold, whose QB1, Ross Jackson, has been breaking down the QB battle all off season. He's out there in California for training camp as well, giving you the inside scoop on everything you want to know about the Saints. So make Locked On Saints your second listen today, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we're going to look at the two front court players that I think are some of the most intriguing here and what success means for them. So we're going to start with Yves Missi, who I am assuming is still going to be the starter this year. It's year 2, and we've seen some flashes from him. The verticality, the shot blocking, the rebounding. Now it's about making an impact on the court. Missi graded out as one of the worst Pelicans last season. Of players who played over 1,000 minutes, his net rating was tied for the lowest at -5.5 with Jeremiah Robinson-Earl. He needs to find a way to be more impactful, and that's going to start with figuring out his role on offense. Last season, the Pelicans were 10.6 points worse per 100 possessions offensively with him on the court. Now, he's a big man. He's a center. So guard play plays a major factor when it comes to that. You know, if you don't have good guard play, what's a big man supposed to do? Let alone a rookie that's not like an Anthony Davis type of skilled big man, right? You know, a Derek Queen kind of big man who can maybe do it without a guard. That's not who Yves Missi is. So putting him in the right positions to succeed will be insanely helpful for his positive impact. Of all the people we've kind of talked about, Missi's might be most dependent on other people. You know, so figure out the role on offense. Is he a lob threat, like whether it's a vertical lob threat, you know, in the dunker spot or in the pick and roll? Is it as kind of a face-up big or a back-to-the-basket post-up big? What's going to make him a threat offensively? You're hearing the themes here, right? And that's going to be how he starts to make a really positive impact, I think, on this roster. It's just put him in the right positions to succeed. Defensively, he needs to continue to rebound. While the Pelicans were better rebounding with him on the court than off court, that's something. So there's some flashes there, but he has the size and the tools to be an elite defensive rebounder. They need that because there's not a ton of defensive rebounding out there on the court. And then show off some rim protection, right? I think if he can get a block per game, we're going to feel really good, again, about what Missi is capable of becoming here in the NBA. So I'm very hopeful that we will see, you know, not quite a breakout year. So he averaged 1.3 blocks per game last season. I don't know if he's going to get exactly the same amount of minutes, same role here, but if he can do that again, you're going to start to believe that maybe there is some degree of rim protection here from him, you know, that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. His block rate was 4.8. That's fine. You know, can that get to 7-8%? That starts to get towards elite numbers. And I'd love to see that from him. And it shouldn't take a ton for him to be able to do that. But figuring out exactly who he is on offense, what the best spot for him defensively is going to go a long way towards establishing, you know, a successful year for him. I think his rookie year was successful because we saw the flashes, similar to what we talked about with Jeremiah Fears, Derek Queen yesterday. Show the flashes. Missi showed the flashes. Now make an impact with those flashes is what we're looking for next. Then finally, Kevon Looney, right? This is the vet who's just done it, knows how to win. Success for him is just going to be, if he's a backup or starter, just being reliable in limited minutes, who defends, rebounds, and sets very, very good screens, and just brings some calmness to the offense. Know where to go, know what to do, right? Know your spots, know your teammates, do all of that. You know, Kevon Looney's not going to be the guy that fills up the box score, but he's the kind of guy that shows up in winning lineups, in my opinion, and, is almost like a glue guy that can make those units function. Show that, like, be that guy, right? This shouldn't be particularly hard for Kevon Looney to be able to do. When you're out there on the court, just focus on rebounding and trying to block some shots. Put enough offensive threats around him for other guys, and it should be fine. He's going to be kind of ignored when it comes to offense. Teams aren't worried about him. But if you can put 4 other threats on there and he just does kind of the dirty work kind of stuff that you're bringing him in to do, I think that makes a lot of sense. And then be that good locker room guy. Everyone has described him as the backbone of that Golden State Warriors team. And now that he's gone, they're like, the culture's kind of gone too. Bring some of that professionalism. Him and Jordan Poole both, I think, are really going to be able to do all of that. And so that would be a successful season. If he kind of helps change the locker room, change the culture of this organization, that's a successful season for Kevon Looney, in my opinion. Do you agree with what I've said in today's show, in yesterday's show? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. There's a couple of players we haven't mentioned. We'll probably throw them in a future show next week. But I wanted to get through some of the biggest names on this roster and what would be considered success for them. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about the guys I haven't mentioned as well. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, this week of Locked On Pelicans. I appreciate y'all so much for listening. We are staying 5 days a week this entire offseason. A lot more great stuff to come for y'all. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join us on YouTube as well. Watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. And as always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast. See y'all next week.